Hey everybody, welcome back to Mind of the Warrior. Doc with you, back again. Sorry about last week. The episode that I'm recording right now was actually the subject matter that I wanted to do last week, but my Mac battery died. Come to find out, this is an existing defect that Apple is aware of, so I just took it in. They replaced it for free, but had to be shipped out, and basically took my MacBook out of my hands for almost the entire week. So I didn't get to record this episode. I apologize for that. Today, as you're listening to this, as this episode comes out, is the day that my book comes out on Amazon. And I wanted this to be a very positive day, a day of, to celebrate the book coming out, to talk about the book. But I feel obligated that I never did an episode specifically addressing what's going on in Afghanistan, that I need to, as an Afghanistan veteran, this is something that I need to talk about. I need some things I need to get off my chest, some things that I think you need to hear, whether you served in Afghanistan or not. So I'm going to get to that in just a minute. But my book is out today. I don't, I hate to start off such a serious episode of the podcast with a plug, but I do want you to buy the book. I mean, I put a good chunk of a year of my life into writing this, longer really. I mean, this is really this is the culmination of a couple of decades of work, but then really seriously sitting down to write the book and get it through editing and get it published over the course of the last year during COVID and everything else. So the title of the book is Honed: Finding Your Edge as a Man Over 40. It's all of my knowledge as a physician, as a former Special Forces operator, as a martial artist, everything that I put into practice in my life to maintain that edge and to keep kicking ass now at age 55. So I hope you guys will go to Amazon.com and check it out. As you're listening to this on Tuesday, the 24th of August, when this episode comes out, it's available on Amazon on Kindle version for only 99 cents. Please take advantage of that. That's going to be a limited time thing. Please buy the Kindle version for 99 cents. And because you're a podcast listener, I'm extending this to podcast listeners, subscribers on the old Dr. Mike Simpson page, and subscribers on Graybeard Performance. You're going to have an opportunity to win a signed hardcover copy of the book. So the way you're going to do that is you're going to go to Amazon.com. You're going to buy the book. You're going to buy Honed: Finding Your Edge as a Man Over 40. And you don't have to buy it in Kindle format. I'm making that available to you. If you want to buy a softback or a hardcover, you can. Write a review immediately after you buy it. Write a review. I'd like for that to be a 5-star review, but if you honestly don't feel you can give one, I understand. Take a screen capture of your review, and then you're going to email it to me at info@graybeardperformance.com. So if you forget that email address, no worries. Just go to graybeardperformance.com, scroll down to where you can send me a message, and it'll take you right to that email address. You're going to upload that screen capture of your Amazon review. And then what I'm going to do is out of the first group of reviews that I get, I'm going to select 5. Haven't quite decided how I'm going to select those yet, maybe for originality. And those 5 people are going to get a personalized and signed hard copy of the book. So again, go to Amazon.com, download the Kindle version for 99 cents, write a review, screen capture it, send it to me, and be entered to win a free, personalized and autographed hard copy version of the book. And I hope you enjoy it. I think there's a lot of life-changing stuff. Next week, we're going to try to talk more specifically about the book. But now on to Afghanistan, because we really need to talk about that now. So, situation on the ground now, not a lot has really changed since last week. Thousands of Americans stranded, tens of thousands of our allies stranded. I don't know the numbers. I'm not going to give numbers because, frankly, I don't know the numbers. And I'm hearing a lot of change in the numbers. And the State Department even said they won't give out the numbers because they feel that it's giving intelligence to the Taliban. I don't know if I really agree with that. I think they didn't know the answer. Some flights are going out 500% capacity. I know you probably saw on my social media, I posted a photograph of the inside of a C-17 that's just packed over capacity. But a lot of flights are going out partially full. And the reason is the difficulty isn't getting flights in and out, even though there is only one airfield there in Kabul. The difficulty is in getting people past the gates, and people are A, hunkered down in their homes, afraid to leave, or hunkered down wherever they feel safe and afraid to leave. B, they're having to go through multiple Taliban checkpoints just to get to the airport. These Taliban checkpoints are already showing themselves to be fraught with violence against people that have any type of association to the U.S. and our allies. Then another set of checkpoints immediately adjacent to the airport. And then you get stuck there. You get stuck there in this sea of humanity. And people have literally been stuck. You've seen these pictures of people. Basically, they're just lined up on streets. They've been there for days in 93-degree heat, only with what they can carry on their back, with their family, with children. This is an issue. You see children being handed over the barbed wire to our troops that are on the ground there. It's emotionally wrenching. If you're not watching it, and I got to call out MSNBC, because MSNBC, of all the major news networks, has really dropped the ball on this. They are not covering it all. And I know this isn't a shock to most people, because MSNBC stopped being real news a long time ago. But I've been making it a point to go to all the major news outlets' web pages every day. And pretty much without fail, the lead story is everything that's going on in Afghanistan, and that should be, right? This is a major event. This is a major black eye for the U.S. This is very much akin. The parallels between the fall of Saigon and the fall of Kabul cannot be drawn too closely, I'll tell you that. And MSNBC is just choosing to ignore it. I mean, the ridiculous stories that they're running as their top stories that have nothing to do with anything important to anybody living in the real world. It just shocks me to no end. So if you have a friend or family member who is a regular watcher of MSNBC, first of all, I apologize to you. I feel sorry for you that you're having to deal with that type of idiocy on a daily basis. But why don't you give them a little counseling on how much of an idiot they are, so that MSNBC's ratings will drop. So they'll start to, maybe there is some hope they could come back around and be a real news agency at some point in the next generation or so. Right now they're talking about a deadline of 31 August, which is kind of it's a very arbitrary deadline. So the original deadline for troop withdrawal, and I'll talk more about this later, was back on 1 May, which didn't happen. So really any deadline that gets drawn now is just something arbitrary that someone says. Well, originally, the current administration in the U.S. said there was a deadline of August 31st, which was literally a number just pulled out of thin air. Well, now the Taliban has picked up on that and said, yeah, that's the deadline. So you got until then, and then it's game on. Then we can just do whatever we want. That's an issue, and we need to push back. You know, we're a superpower. The Taliban doesn't get to tell us what to do. They don't get to tell us what the timeline is for getting our people out. The Taliban is not the elective representatives of Afghanistan, so they don't get to dictate shit to us, quite frankly. And there needs to be some pushback against that. To put this in historical context, I know you've heard this before. It's been said multiple times on the news. This was said back as early as 2001. People talked about, the Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. So the Roman legions, British colonials, the Soviets, now us. Now, it is true that we left under much different circumstances, right? We didn't get driven out in defeat. We won every, strategically and tactically, we won every battle in Afghanistan. There was never anything that we failed to take and or take back. If there was some ebb and flow, we controlled Afghanistan, and not in the way the Soviets did. Was still on their heels from the Mujahideen at every turn. We controlled Afghanistan, but we recognized that we couldn't be there forever, and we chose to leave, and a timetable was set for that. The fact that it appears now to be reverting to what it was before we got there, is not an indication of a strategic or tactical loss. It's an indication of everything that makes that country up. So let me talk about that for just a second. I wrote down some notes, kind of an order that I want to go in, but I'm kind of free rolling this as I go. So bear with me. the fact that Afghanistan, the way that it's drawn on the map, is really pretty arbitrary. And I don't know what it dates back to originally, but the area was known as Khorasan. Back in the time, the earliest recorded history that I know of, Khorasan, and then Sindh was the area going over into Pakistan. There weren't really any hard and fast borders there, but Afghanistan is not so much a country, it's a collection of tribes, and tribe identity certainly supersedes national identity. I said this early on in the war. I said, one of the issues that we're going to have is for people in the rural reaches of Afghanistan, whatever part that might be. And I wrote my area study in the Operations and Intelligence course. I actually wrote on Afghanistan. We did that as a team, going through ONI, and my individual section was on the geography of Afghanistan. So that's what I was responsible for. But the geography of the different areas of Afghanistan, for anybody who's been all over the country, knows is variable. And the tribal outlooks, the country is not joined universally by a language. Pashto and Urdu and Uzbeks, and you have all these people that don't necessarily even get along. But we've drawn this arbitrary border and we've called it a country. And a lot of people don't give a shit who their president is. They don't care. People went their entire lives without even knowing who identified as the leader of the country. All they knew is what their daily struggles were on a day-to-day basis. And that's what they cared much more about. We kind of imposed this idea of the Jeffersonian democracy on them when maybe it wasn't one of their higher priorities in a lot of ways. Some family struggling to eke out an existence somewhere in whatever part. I don't want to draw specific parallels to any one part of Afghanistan, but as farmers or whatever it is they were doing, whether or not they had the right to vote, however the constitution of their country happened to be worded, who was elected, who wasn't elected, those weren't things that necessarily concerned them. What concerned them was, what was the rainy season going to be like? And are their animals sick? And are their family members sick? Is there enough food? Is there enough firewood? These are things that concern them. And, we make all these assumptions as the country that we are, that as to what people want, because we think that people want what we want and what we value and hold dear. And that's not always the case. I'm not saying we were wrong for wanting them to have that. Freedom is a great thing. And wanting them to have the right to vote and the right for Afghani girls to go to school and to teach and to drive and to hold a job and to not wear a hijab unless they choose to do so. These are all things that are great things, and they were worthwhile. But you can't make people want the things that you think are important. So, that's a conversation that we could have for hours on end, in and of itself. There's a line in the movie Avatar. What is it? You can't make people want Coke and jeans, right? Or these people don't want Coke and jeans. And for all that movie is hugely flawed in its political parallels because James Cameron's an idiot. But that one particular line is highly accurate, and it's a mistake that Western man has made repeatedly. Talking about colonialism in Africa, colonialism in India, on up to what happened with the Native Americans here in the United States, and the assumptions that are made about that people that you encounter, indigenous people that you encounter, are going to have the same priorities that you do, and that's not always the case. I'm going to leave that where it is, because again, we could talk in circles on that all day. So let's talk about how we got here. So, no secret, and this has been in the news quite a bit, MSNBC, of course, has been banging the drum that, this is all the previous administration's fault. They made a deal. They got some high-level Taliban officials released to negotiate this. There's a lot of complexities there. Yes, the Trump administration had some high-level Taliban individuals released, but it was, they had people that they knew where they were, that they knew could speak for the rest of the Taliban, that if they got him out, they could negotiate in good faith. And this was all with an eye to getting out of Afghanistan because we'd been there for a long time. And the arguments can be made, should we have gone in 2001, done what we were going to do, put Karzai in, and just leave and let the cards fall where they may? There's an argument for that. Who knows what would have happened? Probably a lot of tribal warfare. Probably would have gone back to the Taliban relatively quickly. I don't know how it could have happened more quickly than it happened this time. But we don't know. Then the argument can be made also that we could have done this in 2011, that, ultimately, Al-Qaeda had been decimated. We had tracked down Osama bin Laden and he had been dealt with. That was the time to leave. Okay, we didn't. Same argument 2014 when we officially ceased combat operations, which was right after my last tour over there, that we could have started a scaled withdrawal at that point. Okay, but we didn't. So there's not a whole lot of point in looking back at what we could have done, what we should have done, right? We can only look at what we did do and where we are now and the decisions that led us here. So did the Trump administration make a deal with the Taliban for our withdrawal? Yes, because they were identified as the threat that was going to come to attempt to fill that vacuum, that if anybody was going to try to take down the Afghani government and the ANA that had been our allies, that's who it was going to be. We knew they were getting refuge in Pakistan. We knew that there was a chance of that happening. So some negotiations had to be made. And the thought process, I think, at the time was that, all right, the Taliban's going to go in. It's a totally different ballgame now, that the Afghans have had a taste of what it's like to live under a democracy, a taste of freedom. They're better trained, so they're going to hold up better. And there was frankly, a lot of overestimations were made. And part of this, I put the brunt of that on, a lot of training went on in the last 20 years. And I know across the board, I never did the traditional SF job in Afghanistan because when I deployed with the JMAO, I had a much different mission. I never did the going in and training partner forces and getting them ready. But I know across the board, everybody that I spoke to, all of the 18 series guys I know that deployed there, said they always knew that their counterparts were not ready, that there was still so much lacking in their training. And I don't think those messages were making it all the way to the top. And you know how this works, right? Is an ODA, an operational detachment alpha, is training some type of Afghan partner unit. They send up a report. Yeah, we trained them on marksmanship, but really only 30% of them are trained. We trained them on tactics. Really only 20% are trained. Their leaders are weak. Unfortunately, the people who we'd like to put into leadership positions, we can't because they came with a rank structure already, and it doesn't matter that the guy's from a rich family, but he's a lieutenant. He has no leadership capability. We don't know what to do about that. And I'm giving very generic examples. So that report goes up, and it gets we called it massaging, right? So that report gets massaged a little bit. That okay, successful training, still not quite where we want them to be, but things are hopeful, right? So then that goes up to the next level. Very successful training, looking good. These are Mark T for trained. These guys are good. So each level that goes up. So you figure by the time that's briefed at the Joint Chiefs level, that's worded as being like everything. This is great. Everything's proceeding on pace. They are highly trained, right? So that's what gets briefed at that level. But and certainly by the time it gets briefed to the president, and I've seen this firsthand. I've been in briefings with generals where I've watched staff officers basically lie to them. Like, wow, you're saying exactly the opposite of what I heard somebody else tell you because you don't want to be the person to give the general bad news. And really, General Milley, will use him as an example. And I know for a fact he's been surrounded by yes men ever since he was 3 Corps commander at Hood, because I saw what his staff was like. And they never gave him bad news. So by the time somebody is wearing that many stars, they've been insulated from bad news for so long that they don't really have good information to go on. Okay. But when they do get it, they don't want to believe it because their own people have lied to them so much that then when they get these intel reports from the ground, they're very dismissive of them, which we can clearly see is what happened in this case, because there were multiple intelligence reports that said exactly what was going to happen happened. And you saw statements from Milley leading into this where he said, oh, it's not a foregone conclusion. And everybody I knew on the ground said it was a foregone conclusion. So again, let's look at this agreement that the previous administration had. So they had an agreement. They were going to be out by May 1st. Which the current administration decided was not achievable. Fine. See, so we've already extended that. So he's already shown that he can take the previous administration's agreement and just tear it up if he wants. So the fact that we still had to get out at all is a complete untruth, because he's already extended the deadline, which means it could be extended indefinitely. And if you look at what we had to do in places like the Sinai, where we had a peacekeeping mission going on a rotational basis for decades, or in North Korea, which we're still sending troops to the DMZ, right? And the war was over in the 50s, technically, although it's an armistice. It's the war's technically still going on. That could have been the situation that we ended up in. And the fact that there were no American casualties in, I believe, the last 18 months, it was probably sustainable. And that's been, the current administration has been criticized for that, and then pivoted on that question and said, oh, well, yeah, but the moment we said we weren't leaving, that would have changed. Well, we don't know, right? We really don't know. And there certainly are ways it could do it. Like we definitely shouldn't have, I'm getting ahead of myself. What we woulda, shoulda, coulda, and what we can do, I'm going to get into in just a minute. Let me get back to the previous agreement. So according to the previous agreement, no final, and I'm reading this directly. I looked these up today. This was on Yahoo News. The Trump administration developed a conditions-based withdrawal. According to this plan, no final withdrawal could have occurred until final successful peace negotiations took place between the Taliban and the Ghani government. Okay, so that was the final condition. Like, we aren't leaving until that happens. That never happened. Okay, that's been the reason for the delay, is the Taliban and the Ghani government weren't sitting down to reach that final agreement. And it wasn't because of the Ghani government, it was because of the Taliban. So they were just stalling for time because they knew that we were fatigued on this. They knew we had a new administration that wanted out. They knew what President Biden's record was. This is, going back as far as 2011, saying we just need to get the hell out of there. So they stalled, and they didn't uphold their end of the agreement. So at that point, the agreement is null and void, or at least it's in limbo until they come to the table, which they haven't. So we were not in any rush to leave. We're still not in any rush to leave. They haven't sat down with the Ghani government. We don't have to leave by August 31st. We don't have to do shit because they haven't upheld their end of the bargain. So this whole lie that keeps getting perpetuated that this is the inherited deal, completely not. If you either go by the inherited deal, which, oh, by the way, this administration has taken a lot of things that were, whether they were executive orders, policies, what have you, and thrown them completely out the window. They did that with the border, so why couldn't they do that with this? They absolutely could have. God, I hate getting political, but I've been painted into a corner on this, people. I'm sorry. In March of 2021, Senator Bob Menendez, who I've never cared for, but he's chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, who is a Democrat, he even said this: the Taliban is clearly not abiding by all of its commitments under the February 29th agreement, and it's raising serious questions about the future of Afghan security and governance. So this was back in March that this was said, right? So back in March, it was identified that they weren't upholding their end of the bargain. Therefore, we were not obligated to uphold our end of the bargain. So while we're talking about this, like we have to get out and we have to abide by it when they're not, it's a huge issue. Other things that they'd broken in the agreement: the Taliban had not broken off ties with and or condemned al-Qaeda. That was required in the agreement. They failed to do that. They had continued attacks on civilians. They'd blown up some buses. Now they'd refrained from attacking Americans, which was part of the deal, right? And they knew what they could get away with. They knew that a busload of Afghani civilians doesn't make the news the same way that mortaring an American base or a green on blue attack will, right? So they were avoiding what they knew would make it in the news, draw the ire of the American people. And also, there's a little bit. I saw this when I was in Colombia too. There's a little bit of a loose cannon theory that a lot of our enemies have when it comes to the American military. That regardless of rules of engagement, if it comes down to one of our own, we might just go cowboy. Which was the reason that during the 90s, although there was like a 300% increase in kidnappings of civilians and of oil workers especially. And if you ever saw the movie, there was a movie with Russell Crowe, Proof of Life, that it was a pretty fair depiction of what those types of abductions were like. But they left military alone. And the reason that they left military alone is we'd established around 1992, 1993 timeframe, I think around 1993 timeframe, the American government had established that, hey, if you're a civilian and you're in Colombia, Peru, and you get abducted, we're not doing anything about it, right? So your company's just going to have to take out kidnapping insurance. And you're just going to have to work that out with the local authorities. We're not doing anything about it. But the FARC, the Sendero Luminoso, and everybody else knew that, hey, you roll up an SF guy, his buddies are probably coming looking for you, and that's going to be the way it is. So that wouldn't be a good idea. Taliban kind of knows that. They kind of knew that, right, leading up to this. That if we get too squirrely, then some MRAPs might come rolling out of the gate, and we don't want to risk that. So they played it smart. We saw a very similar situation all throughout the 90s in Iraq. So Bush Sr., George Herbert Walker Bush's administration had made very specific agreements with Saddam Hussein, with Iraq, as to what the guidelines for peace were going to be moving forward. And during the Clinton years, Saddam Hussein thumbed his nose at all of that. He did everything that he was told not to do. He did, right? They fired at our planes in an authorized, what to them was a no-fly zone. They were working on, I'm not going to get into the whole WMD thing, but they certainly had a program to advance that. They were getting surface-to-air missiles flown in from France, even though there was an embargo. They were violating the treaty on multiple levels, and they just kept getting stern letters of condemnation was all they got. No action, right? So that was one of the big arguments in the early days of the Iraq War. I'm like, well, they've got it was something like 127 treaty violations. So we were authorized to go in there like 8 years ago. So yeah, of course we can go in there now, regardless of what else is going on in the world. But the bottom line here is they were ignoring the treaty. We continued to abide by it. And we're doing the same thing now, right? The Taliban has pretty much wiped their ass with this treaty, but we're continuing to uphold our end of the bargain. And there's something innately wrong with that. So what you're ending up with is Kabul airport on lockdown, American forces, you have American allies and American civilians trapped in the city, and no American force is going to get them. UK forces are going to get people. French forces are going to get people. Italian forces are going to get people. We're doing nothing. We're sitting at the airport waiting for them to come to us. And I can tell you the guys on the ground are getting pissed, royally pissed off, because they know what they could do. Especially you get up in a tower, you get on a piece of high ground, and you can see where you need to go to get these people and to help them, and you can't do it. Again, man, I hate having to weigh in on shit that's even remotely political, and they're forcing me into this. Politics aside, what probably should have happened is we should have kept Bagram, and this is what I was alluding to before. So Bagram was going to be probably a better staging point. For those of you who've been there, it's huge, right? So it's difficult to control, for sure. But if you're going to have a good airhead into the country, I didn't realize how tiny the airfield at Kabul is. There's not a lot to it. And I heard it, Shapiro made the point today, you drop one mortar round in the middle of that airfield and you've incapacitated at least for a short time. We should have kept our hands on a better airhead, that if we did have to ferry in troops, now granted, everybody's consolidated in Kabul right now, so that's where we need to get them out of. But it would have been much easier to have a reactionary force that was maybe in Bagram that could have been flown to Kabul, that could then be going out doing these missions to bring people in, and then have aircraft rotating in 24 hours nonstop to get people to Bagram, stage them there, finish the vetting process there, right? So, screw doing the vetting process at the gate. Let's just make sure nobody has any explosives or arms on them, get them on an airplane, get them to Bagram. Now we do the formal vetting process. So at least we're doing it in a safe place. I mean, for God's sakes, we did this for illegal immigrants crossing our southern border, right? We're allowing them a safe haven and shelter while we sort out the details of their predicament. Why are we not doing the same for American allies? No, this is the equivalent. People talked about how inhumane the stay in Mexico policy was. How inhumane is the stay on the other side of the razor wire in Kabul policy? How fucking inhumane is that? We could have been scooping them up, flying to Bagram, but what did we do in Bagram? We turned it over to the ANA, and then our people got on a plane and left in the middle of the night. They didn't even know, the ANA didn't even know they were leaving. And they wake up in the morning and they're solely responsible for Bagram, and Bagram fell very, very quickly. If we would have maintained that, we would have maintained an airhead that we wouldn't have to reclaim. We could fly in a brigade combat team from the 82nd, a Ranger battalion, whatever we need to, could be flown right there into Bagram to provide security for all these operations. A brigade from 10th Mountain to provide perimeter security, civil affairs assets, people to in there putting up tents to provide temporary housing and temporary food to all of these refugees. And again, we do the vetting process right there. Then we put them on planes and they're flown from there to Ramstein or to Dover or wherever. This all could have been done, but it's too late for that now. Nobody called me a month ago. Nobody called me 2 months ago. We didn't do that. So the fact of the matter is, there's not a whole lot of sense in looking at what we could have done then, because we can't turn back the clock. We can't do it. We can't go back to 2002. We can't go back to 2011. We can't go back to 2014. We can't go back to 4 months ago. We can only deal with now. So where do we go from here? And that's what I want to talk about. And honestly, I'm just, this is just going to be words, right? It's not like anything I say on this podcast is going to have any impact on global policy, have any impact on international relations. Nobody in Washington, D.C. is going to hear this and it's going to impact them. But I'm just going to give you my opinion. My opinion is we have to stand up to the Taliban and we have to get our people and our allies out. That's full stop. This has to happen. All right. Fuck deadlines. This, now is the time to draw a line in the sand. All right. To say, no, you don't get to call the shots. You might have this country for 100 years the day we leave, but right now you don't get to call the shots. And we are getting our people out and we are getting our allies out. And if you don't like it, tough shit. Because guess what? If you don't like it, air power is going to be brought to bear. If you don't like it, artillery fire is going to be brought to bear. Drones are going to be brought to bear. We'll use every means necessary. Because, yeah, it's really dicey if you tried to go out and take Kabul because you're going to have to wade through a sea of civilians. But I guarantee you, we know where Taliban strongholds are, where there are no friendlies. We know where Taliban convoys are, where there are no friendlies. And we can just start taking out targets all over the country and say, all right, look, we're going to take out a convoy and a base camp every hour on the hour until you back the fuck off and give us a 10-mile ring of safety around the airport with no checkpoints and people have freedom to move and safe passage. Until you do that, we're just going to take out one target an hour every hour. That's what needs to happen. And here's the deal is we cannot leave our allies. And the reason we can't leave our allies is the message that sends to the world that you help us for 20 years and your reward is going to be to get left on the tarmac somewhere, to die, to have your wife's teeth bashed out with the butt of an AK, to have your daughter raped in front of you, to have your son's hands lopped off, to be hung and have your DOD ID card burned into your chest. That's the message that we want to people that could be our potential allies in future conflicts, that's what we're going to do to people. we've done that. We did this to the Kurds in the past. We did this to the Montagnards in Vietnam. We've left allies multiple times, and it sickens me to think about it. This is the fall of Saigon and the Bay of Pigs all rolled into one. It's literally the worst of both. But you know what? The Bay of Pigs, for as much as Kennedy fucked that up, he didn't go on the news and say this was Eisenhower's plan. Right? The buck stopped with him. And the current administration is not doing that. They're all about pointing fingers. Oh, my hands were tied. We didn't have a choice. Bullshit. So what do we need right now? We need boots on the ground. We need more boots on the ground. We need drones in the air, and we probably even need Spectre gunships in the air down there. And shit needs to start happening. When you can see in view of checkpoints, in view, America, cell phone footage that may even been taken by American troops, that you can see some Taliban douchebag with a stick beating some woman over the head. Why is a sniper round not being sent into that fucking shitbag's head? And I know why it's not, because of the rules of engagement. They're being told not to engage because what we don't want, we don't want civilians caught in the crossfire. Hey, I understand that, right? But what we can do is mark those people, and we know where they're going back to. I guarantee that's not a secret. We need to be taking these people out. Something has got to give, and we need to stand up. How do you stop a bully? You stand up to them. And right now the Taliban is flexing their muscle and they're being a bully. We need to stand up to them. We also, all these locations where we have the Blackhawks, the MRAPs, whatever, we need to be drone striking the shit out of those right now. Okay. Those all need to be destroyed. Okay. Because, like the Blackhawks, it's not like the Taliban are ever going to fly those. Just the maintenance and everything else that's involved in that, it's just completely impossible. But what they will do is sell them. So this is how they're going to bankroll themselves going forward. There's nothing that they have in the way of tech, because if this stuff that was being left for the ANA, we were going to have to help them with the maintenance moving forward, right? So, things like fuel were going to have to come from outside the country. Parts were going to have to come from, obviously they're not making parts for MRAPs over there, right? All these things were going to come from outside the country. And the Taliban's not going to have that. So, some of it's going to get driven for about 6 months and then just stopped on the side of the road. But a lot of it's going to get sold, okay? It's going to get sold to Russia. It's going to get sold to China. It's going to get sold to, private security companies out of Rwanda or wherever else. So we just need to start destroying that, because that's what's going to bankroll the Taliban moving forward. And talks have already been made about sanctions. Well, that's how they're going to get around sanctions, is they're going to sell all that shit that we left them. So sanctions aren't going to do anything. They're going to sell all the shit we left them, and they're going to sell opium, heroin, whatever. And that's totally how they're going to finance themselves. So we need to put an end to that. We need to destroy that shit. President Biden, I think, in possibly the worst statement I've ever heard made by a president, he said the Taliban are having an existential crisis. No, they're not. They're not having an existential crisis. They're radical jihadists. They're Islamic fundamentalists. They have twisted the Quran into something that it's not. So they think that they're right in doing everything they're right. They don't give two shits how the rest of the world views what they do. They don't care. Right? And the fact that anybody in U.S. government even thinks that, well, they're going to have to take a moment to think, how's the world going to view them? They don't care. When you're a fanatic and you know that everything you do by virtue of you doing it is right, you don't give a shit what somebody 3,000 miles away thinks of that, who comes from a culture that you condemn and you think to be abhorrent. They don't care at all. And he did bring up the monetary aspect of it, but guess what? Somebody's always going to finance that. You think Russia and China aren't going to step in there to finance that? Absolutely, they will. This is Russia's chance to take over Afghanistan successfully and do it financially, right? And all they got to do is prop up the Taliban and be giving them money, which they'll be more than happy to do. And they control the border up at Roof of the World, so they can do that. It's ridiculous to think they're having an existential crisis. So I wanted to save this for last. as a veteran, I know most of you listen to this. If you're an Afghanistan GWAT veteran, you were probably over there for more time than I was. I did 2 tours. Both were relatively short, because in the units that I deployed with, they were. I was busy, so I feel like I put in a hard day's work every day that I was there, both times. But I know a lot of people are struggling with the question, was this all in vain? We were over there for all this time. Was it in vain? And the answer is no, it wasn't in vain. And I'll tell you why. And I made some specific points on this, and I want to try to cover. I made 5 points, and I want to cover all of them here. So the reason it wasn't in vain, number one, we showed the world what happens if you fuck with us, right? On 9/11, 2001, something terrible happened, right? Some evil people crashed planes into buildings and killed a lot of innocent civilians. And we said, no, you're not going to do that. That we will find the people responsible, and the people, if you're not directly responsible, we'll find the people that support the people responsible, and we'll take care of you and we'll kill you, right? And we did that all the way up to and including killing UBL in 2011, right? And that was important that got shown, that this wasn't like the attempted bombing in the basement of the World Trade Center under Bill Clinton that we just let go, or the coal that we just let go. All these other things that getting driven out of Mogadishu and we just let it go. All these other things that we had just let go. Now it was like, no, we're not going to let it go anymore. You've pushed us too far. And that was a message that had to be sent. And whether you realize it or not, that message was heard around the world. It absolutely was heard around the world. So that's number one. Number two, during World War II, high-level statisticians talked about the importance of what they called the two-front war, right? The Eastern Front and the Western Front. And the Western Front, of course, was the allies that you're familiar with, the UK, the US, Free France. And then you had the Eastern Front, which was the Russian, also known as the Russian Front. And it was important that you were fighting them on two fronts in order to keep them stretched out, right? Because if you only fought them on one front at a time, then they could bring all of their power to bear in one location and could easily defeat you. It really, GWAT was much the same. Is we had to keep them fighting a multi-front war. And for every dirtbag with a bomb vest and an AK that was fighting in the Hindu Kush somewhere, that's somebody that wasn't trying to sneak into our country through a porous border and get in a Cessna or walk into a Walmart or a mall and do something crazy over here, right? So for that reason, it was important because we kept them fighting a multi-front war, whether you realize it or not. And some dipshit pointed out on social media, oh, we had terrorist attack, we had San Bernardino, we had the Boston bombing. Yeah, and if you look at who those were, like none of those were Afghans, none of those were Taliban who snuck their way into the U.S. to do that, right? They were radicalized people. But thankfully, relatively small incidents. We didn't have another 9/11 in 20 years. And it wasn't because it wasn't possible. It was because we were making it impossible by keeping them fighting on a multi-front war and by stepped up measures here at home with the Department of Homeland Security. So that's number two. Number three, if you think about when 9/11 happened, and if you think about when we first went to Afghanistan, so a statement was made by Donald Rumsfeld. This was in regards specifically to Iraq, that you don't go to war with the army you want, you go to war with the army that you have. And the army that we had at the time had the wrong focus, was not well trained, not well equipped. Right? The army of the 90s had lost focus on battle readiness. Budget was slashed, manpower was slashed, equipment was slashed. The introduction of the M4 systems as we were supposed to get them was way behind. The body armor that everybody was supposed to have, By the year 2001, they didn't have. We didn't know what we didn't know about a lot of things like Humvees. The strikers, one of many of the Shinseki disasters, didn't measure up in any way that they were supposed to. The only thing that a striker ended up being is basically a better version of a Humvee, is all it ended up being. It didn't do any of the things that it was supposed to do, which is why ultimately we had to replace it with things like MRAPs, right? So if you think about in the state of disrepair that our military was in 2001, wrong doctrine, wrong equipment, much of that's been remedied. Now I'm fearful now because I see a backslide, that the priorities are in the military appear to be wrong again. But we made a lot of progress. In tactical trauma medicine alone, we made monumental progress. We made more progress in 10 years of global war on terror than we had probably 40 years before that. Body armor, close quarter battle, integrating drones into how we fight. The changes in realizing that manned reconnaissance on the ground is probably not going to work in this century at all. We really learned that lesson. I talked about this when I was on Kyle Lamb's podcast. We learned that lesson really during Gulf War I, but then learned it during the Operation Red Wings, and what happened to Marcus Luttrell and his team is when it was really driven home, I think, and put the final nail in the coffin when it comes to ground eyes-on reconnaissance. These are all lessons that were important to be learned, and we took some monumentally big steps forward military capability-wise. And there are threats that are out there that those lessons learned are going to directly contribute to our success in another conflict, in a peer or near peer conflict. And that might seem like a dispassionate way to look at it, but I think it's a pragmatic way to look at it. That we learned some very painful lessons, and many came at the cost of lives. But we're talking about the potential for tens of thousands being saved later, possibly our entire way of life being saved later because of the things that we learned in this conflict. So as hard as that might be to swallow, I want that to be the point really that you reflect on the most, is that point. And that's number 3. Number 4, there are Afghans in their early 20s that all they have known is the Afghanistan of GWAT. They don't know the Taliban era. They don't even know what it was like. I don't think this is over. I think the Taliban took control relatively quickly, but the Northern Alliance is already starting to stand up, and you've got Afghans in their late teens and early 20s that only know one way of life. And when push comes to shove, I don't think they're gonna tolerate the Taliban going back to the other way of life. I talked early on about whether that's what they want or not. I don't know if they do, but I don't think we're going to find out right now. I think we're going to find out in the next 18 to 24 months as we see what happens. And maybe a lot of them won't stand and fight, but maybe they'll choose to leave. Those are people that we saved, because those are people that we showed what life could be like. And this whole, those people you see standing in line, they should be standing there. They should be staying there and fighting for their country. That's easy to say from over here, folks. That's easy to say watching it on television. It's a lot harder to say when you didn't have any weapons in your house and you woke up in the middle of the night and the Taliban rolled in. It's a little bit harder to say, I'm not going to cast judgment on any of those people, but I do think you're going to see a change in the future where people are either going to be standing up or a mass exodus. And to what extent the Taliban allows that to occur, I don't know. But think of it this way: those are people that were saved, and they never would have been saved. They were destined to a life of much lower quality under Taliban rule. People got opportunities in the last 20 years. Women going to school, women being pilots and diplomats that never would have been allowed under Taliban rule. And that happened because of us. And in some way, shape, or form, those people are going to go on to have, those that survive, because it's dicey right now, but they are going to go on to have better lives. And some of them will be there. Some of them will be relocated here in the United States or in other countries, but they're going to lead better lives. And that opportunity is because of what we did. That's number 4. Hold on. Fucking telemarketers. Number 5. And this is if you don't remember anything else, man, this is true of every war. But I was never over there for what elections were going to be. I was never over there for anything else. I was only there to take care of our guys if they got shot. Both of my deployments were as a physician. I was there to take care of the operators if, God forbid, anything happened to them and they were injured. That's the only reason I was there. If you were there for the people to your left and right, the people in your squad, the people in your platoon, the people under your command. That's why you were there. Fuck the politicians. Fuck lines on a map. I don't give a shit about any of that. I was there for the guys on the helicopter with me. I was there for the guys after a mission, sat around grilling a steak with and playing a game of cornhole and smoking cigars, and the guys you went to the gym with and gave each other shit before a workout, and the guys you'd walk down to chow with. That's why I was there. Not any of these other big idealistic reasons, right? I mean, you can't look at it that way. Everything is cyclical, and one way to look at it is, we defeated Germany, and half for years, half of Germany was free and half was under communist rule. And I don't think any of the World War II era veterans beat themselves over that, because half of the country didn't get to be free, right? I mean, there's all these jokes about how we saved France and how they've in World War II, and how they've done nothing but stab us in the back ever since, which is not 100% correct. But it's just because you go in and you shed blood for somebody on their soil, that doesn't mean that they're going to live their life exactly the way you want to moving forward. So honestly, I mean, 2-3 years from now, they could have voted the Taliban in. I mean, that realistically could have happened. You just never know. And it's painful to see. So don't fret over the political objectives or the lines on a map or anything like that. If you went over there and you did the best you could, then you hold your head fucking high. Because for all the reasons that I just gave you, you should be proud of what we did there. And what we did there was necessary, and it was not in vain. And you fucking remember that. And you remind your buddies of that. That we did our fucking job. That we won every battle. And the politicians chose to flush this down the drain at the 11th hour. Well, we don't control that. We control what we did. And I have no regrets. It sucks. No one, there's looking at a KIA bracelet, or when that anniversary rolls around. Yeah, that sucks, man. But they didn't die in vain. For all the reasons that I've given you, they did not die in vain. This was not a waste. And don't ever let anybody tell you otherwise. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to close with a quote that is often attributed to Plato, but it was actually said by a philosopher named George Satayana. You probably heard it before. And the quote is, "Only the dead have seen the end of war." Remember that, everybody. And until next time, live life like a warrior.